The wind howled through the broken trees as Ethan Carter stood in front of the old cabin, staring at the rotting wood and collapsing roof that had just become his entire inheritance. The small structure leaned slightly to one side, its windows cracked and its porch sinking into the muddy ground. It looked less like a home and more like something the forest itself was slowly reclaiming. Neighbors from a nearby town had already gathered along the dirt road, watching with smirks and quiet laughter. To them, the broke veteran who had returned from war with nothing had just inherited the most worthless property in the county. What none of them knew was that hidden beneath the silence of that forgotten cabin was a secret worth $2 million, and the only one who could sense it was a loyal dog standing beside him. Before the story continues, if you believe that silent heroes deserve second chances and that sometimes the world hides miracles in the most unlikely places, take a moment to like this video, comment, share it with someone who loves inspiring stories, and subscribe to the channel so more powerful stories like this can reach people around the world. Ethan Carter had once lived a very different life. Years earlier, he had been a strong and disciplined soldier serving overseas for the United States Army. The war had shaped him in ways few people could understand. He had gone into battle with courage and returned with scars that were invisible but heavy. The nightmares, the silence, and the difficulty of fitting back into normal life slowly pushed him away from the world he once knew. Jobs came and went. Crowded places made his mind restless. Friends slowly drifted away. The only constant in his life became a large German shepherd named Ranger, a service dog who had once helped him through the hardest months after returning home. When Ethan received a letter about the inheritance, he almost ignored it. The letter explained that an elderly, distant relative named Samuel Carter had passed away in a quiet rural county in Colorado and had left Ethan his old cabin in the woods. Ethan barely remembered Samuel. The man had been a quiet pilot decades ago who rarely visited family gatherings and eventually disappeared from everyone's lives. To Ethan, the cabin sounded like nothing more than another abandoned building that would probably cost money just to tear down. Still, Ethan had nowhere else to go. With his truck barely running and his savings almost gone, he drove across several states with Ranger sitting calmly in the passenger seat. When they finally reached the location, the sight confirmed what everyone in town already believed. The cabin looked forgotten by time. The roof sagged. Moss covered the wooden walls. The forest had nearly swallowed the small clearing where it stood. People from a nearby town were curious about the newcomer. They quickly learned that the man living in the broken cabin was a struggling veteran with little money and no clear future. Some shook their heads in pity, but others laughed quietly behind his back. In a town where land and appearance mattered, the old Carter cabin was considered the poorest piece of property in the area. Ethan ignored the whispers. He had learned long ago that silence was easier than defending himself. Each day, he worked slowly to repair small pieces of the cabin. He fixed loose boards, cleaned the dust inside the rooms, and patched holes in the roof using scraps he found in town. Ranger followed him everywhere, watching with calm loyalty as if the dog understood that this fragile place was their last chance at stability. The nights in the forest were quiet, but heavy with memories. The creaking wood and distant wind sometimes reminded Ethan of sound from the war. Ranger would often lie beside him, resting his head near Ethan's arm, as if sensing when the veteran's thoughts drifted too far into the past. Slowly, the cabin began to feel less like a burden and more like a place where Ethan could breathe again. One evening, about 2 weeks after moving in, Ranger began behaving strangely. The dog paced along the back wall of the cabin near the fireplace, his nose pressed against the wooden floorboards, sniffing carefully. At first, Ethan assumed the dog had found a mouse or some other animal hiding under the cabin. But Ranger kept returning to the same spot, scratching lightly at the floor and then looking up as if trying to communicate something important. Ethan had spent enough time working with Ranger to trust the dog's instincts. He grabbed a small crowbar and began prying up the loose wooden boards near the fireplace. The wood came up easier than expected, revealing a narrow metal plate beneath the floor. Dust and dirt covered it, but the outline was clear. Someone had intentionally hidden something there long ago. Ethan carefully lifted the plate, revealing a small compartment carved into the foundation beneath the cabin. Inside sat several tightly sealed metal containers and an old leather briefcase that had clearly been protected from moisture and time. Ethan's heart began to pound as he pulled the containers out one by one. Inside the metal cases were stacks of old bonds, rare coins, and carefully preserved gold bars wrapped in protective cloth. The leather briefcase contained documents, maps, and financial records connected to aviation companies from decades earlier. Samuel Carter, the quiet pilot who had once owned the cabin, had apparently invested in several early aviation ventures long before they became massive companies. For reasons unknown, he had stored a large portion of his wealth inside this hidden compartment rather than keeping it in banks. When Ethan later took the items to financial experts, the value shocked everyone involved. The gold alone was worth a fortune, but the rare investment bonds connected to early aviation companies had grown dramatically in value over the years. Together, the collection was worth nearly $2 million. News spread through the small town faster than wildfire. The same people who once laughed at Ethan now looked at the cabin with amazement. Reporters briefly visited. Financial advisors offered assistance. But Ethan remained the same quiet man he had always been. The money did not change the way he carried himself. If anything, it deepened his sense of responsibility. For Ethan, the discovery was never about becoming rich. It felt more like a second chance that life had quietly placed beneath his feet. The cabin that everyone mocked had become the foundation for something new. He repaired the property fully, restoring the old structure while keeping its humble character intact. More importantly, Ethan used much of the money to help others who had faced struggles similar to his own. He quietly funded programs that helped veterans transition back into civilian life. He donated to service dog training organizations that paired wounded soldiers with loyal companions like Ranger. And he turned part of the surrounding land into a peaceful retreat where veterans could spend time in nature and recover away from the noise of the world. Ranger remained by Ethan's side through every step of this transformation. The dog who had once scratched at the floor of a broken cabin had unknowingly uncovered a hidden future not just for Ethan, but for many others who would later find hope there. Years later, the Carter cabin no longer looked abandoned. The roof was strong, the porch rebuilt, and warm lights glowed through the windows each evening. Veterans often visited the property, sharing quiet conversations around a fire while the forest stood peacefully around them. Just before the story ends, take a moment to comment below and tell us where you are watching from and whether you believe loyal dogs truly have a special instinct to protect and guide their humans. Ethan often sat on the porch at sunset with Ranger lying beside him, looking out over the same forest that once seemed empty and hopeless. The laughter of the town no longer mattered. The broken cabin that everyone once mocked had become a place of healing, generosity, and second chances. And in the quiet moments when the wind moved through the trees, Ethan sometimes looked down at Ranger and gently placed his hand on the dog's head, silently grateful that the greatest treasure hidden beneath that old cabin was not the gold or the money, but the loyal companion who would help him find it.